Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. You are joining an America Walks webinar called When Driving is Not an Option. And I have some really interesting and special guests today, and we're really excited to have a conversation with them. We will get started in about 15 seconds, just letting people in. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you for joining. My name is Ruth Rosas. I'm a program manager at America Walks, and I am helping Anna Zivarts, who is an author and the director of Disability Mobility Initiative at the Disability Rights Washington, to facilitate this discussion. Anna and I both help organize Week Without Driving nationally, and so it's been really exciting. We are also joined by Gabe Cesares from an executive director of Link Houston, and Laura Saltzman, senior policy analyst at Access Living. So you'll hear more about them and their stories and the work that they're doing in a little bit. We want to thank our partners, Tool Design, Ego Connor, Active People, Healthy Nation. We're grateful to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and our partners for supporting us. If you are interested in supporting our work, a link will be put in the chat if you'd like to donate. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A. It's at the bottom of your screen in your dashboard, and we will answer some of those questions at the end or answer them in our blog. If you have any needs for captions, those are also in the same place on the dashboard. The webinar is also recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. All right, so now that I have the slides off, I want to present Anna Zivarts. Anna, like I said, Anna and I have been working on the Week Without Driving since 2023, but Anna has been working on Week Without Driving for a while now, and we'll kind of tell her story. Anna is a low vision parent and a non-driver, and is also the author of When Driving is Not an Option, Steering Away from Car Dependency. Anna launched the Week Without Driving Challenge at the directs of Disability Mobility Initiative at Disability Rights Washington, where she organizes to bring the voices of non-drivers to the planning and policy-making tables. You can also get her book. You can order it. There will be a link in the chat from islandpress.org. And if you use the code webinar at the checkout, you'll get 30% off. So, or you can get it at the library. I will pass it over to Anna to introduce herself a little bit more and her book and our guests.
Thanks so much, Ruth, and thanks America Walks for hosting me. It's really exciting to get to talk about this work with you all, to get to highlight Week Without Driving, and to get to introduce you to two wonderful guests. And we're going to have I think, a great conversation about how to do disability work, how to do transportation advocacy, and how to build the kind of coalitions we need to build to start to reduce our car dependency, to move us away from that. So I'm going to tell you just briefly about myself and my story and how the Week Without Driving got started, how this book happened to come along, the story behind it, and then I'm going to introduce Gabe and Laura and ask them some questions so you get to understand their work as well. Because I really, this book is about coalition building. It is about building power. It is about organizing. I don't pretend to have all the answers at all. It really is about getting people to think about the people who aren't in the room already, whose voices aren't being heard, who are excluded from our communities because of a lack of transportation access, a lack of affordable housing. So excited to have this conversation with you all. So my story, how I came to write this book, I grew up in Washington State, and I was born with an eye condition, sort of a neurological condition called nystagmus. It makes my eyes shake all the time, just a little bit like this when I'm conscious. And that makes it difficult for me to see things. I don't see distances very well, or details, or fast-moving objects, which all those together make driving really not a safe or comfortable option for me. I tried as a teenager to pass the vision test at the DMV. I could not pass it. I had a friend try to teach me how to drive anyway. I wrecked her mom's car in a parking lot, and luckily we were okay. It was a good way for me to learn, really, really understand that driving wasn't going to be an option for me to get around. And growing up in a pretty rural area, I felt pretty isolated. Like a lot of teenagers, I really hated relying on my parents for rides. And so when I heard about New York City and that there was a subway there and that it ran 24 hours a day, I set my mind on moving there. And I moved there, and I lived in New York City for about 15 years. And for me, having that kind of access was really wonderful, because I didn't have to explain to people that I couldn't come meet them, or I couldn't get to a job because I didn't have reliable transportation. I had that kind of transportation. And the flip side of that was, though, that I often didn't talk to people about my disability because I had a lot of shame and stigma having grown up with a disability, not really being connected to the disability community, not really understanding the strength and power in owning that part of myself. And so my son was born in 2016, and he shortly after being born, was also diagnosed with nystagmus. And that was a real shock to me. I didn't know it was hereditary. I don't think anybody expected it to be hereditary in my case. And so um, I was really had a lot of sadness, and I was really upset. And I started to reflect on sort of how that was actually my own feelings about, my childhood, and feeling really isolated and feeling alone. And I didn't want him to have that feeling. And so I recognized that I needed to sort of reconnect myself with the disability community and figure out ways to be involved, and to figure out ways to make the world a more connected and inclusive place. And so that led me to moving back to Washington State and working for Disability Rights Washington, which is the organization I work for today. And I started doing a lot of transportation advocacy there around storytelling, collecting stories, helping people share their stories, helping people become advocates to push for better transit access, better sidewalks, sidewalk connections, accessible sidewalks. And in collecting these stories and getting to interview people, I recognized that there was a need for these stories to be out in the world, because I wanted kids like myself growing up in areas without transportation, who couldn't drive, to feel like they weren't so alone. I wanted them to see that there were other people out there, and that there was a whole world of possibility to get around without driving, but we just have to be more intentional about designing communities that can work for non-drivers. So that's sort of how the book came to be. The Week Without Driving was part of our work at Disability Rights Washington to make sure that elected leaders and policymakers, many of whom have the privilege of driving, who can, grab the keys and go where they want to go, and have a very busy schedule, and don't take the time to take transit because it's often less convenient than driving, that they start to understand some of the gaps in the system in their communities, and that they're also aware that there are lots of non-drivers out there. 30% of the population are non-drivers across our country. In some communities, especially low-income communities, Black and Brown communities, that rate is higher. And so we need communities that can include all of us, right? And the idea was to use the Week Without Driving to ask elected leaders to try for 1 week, just 1 week, to get around without driving themselves. And it's been an amazing, it's grown incredibly. We started in 2021 in Washington State. This is the 4th year now of the Week Without Driving. And we partnered last year with America Walks, and Ruth has really helped us grow it to a national campaign. And we have all 50 states now, I think, or very close. If anyone knows anyone in Mississippi, that's our last state to really nail down. But yeah, so that's how this grew. I want to now introduce my guest, because I think the most important part of this work is what I was saying, is the coalitions that we can build across from the disability community to other active transportation activists and advocates, to people working in public health, to people working at transit agencies, to people working in climate and environmental justice work. And so I'm going to introduce Gabe and Laura. I'm going to read their bios, and I'm going to get kind of close to the screen here because that's how I read. So Gabe Cazares serves as the executive director of Link Houston, which is a nonprofit organization that advocates for a robust and equitable transportation network. Gabe leads Link Houston staff in developing their role in shaping organizational policies. As a blind individual, he is deeply passionate about the mission in shaping public transportation to be safe, reliable, and accessible for all Houstonians. And Laura Saltzman is a disabled woman and a lifelong resident of Chicago. She is the senior policy analyst where she leads city policy work at Access Living with a particular focus on transportation. So welcome, Gabe and Laura. So the first question I want to ask you both, and I'll start with Gabe, is how you came to do this work. What drew you to it? And if you want to say a little bit about what the work is too, that's fine too, so to give people a bit more context. So start with Gabe and then Laura.
Sure, Anna, thanks for having me, and thanks to America Walks for hosting. You know, what really brought me to this work is the nature of my disability. I am a blind person. While I can drive, it is not safe for me to do so because I can't see. So because of that experience, I grew up in a mixed immigration status family. We were lower income. So I grew up in neighborhoods that didn't have sidewalks, that had open ditches, that flooded every time it rained. I grew up in a family of six that had very limited resources, and yet still a large part of our income was spent on a vehicle for the family, because in Houston, it's very difficult to move around without a vehicle. And those experiences really shaped the way I view transportation. I was fortunate enough to spend time living in other places, in Baltimore and in DC, doing work shortly out after college. And that really, having the experience of moving around in DC, using public transportation, a robust transportation system, really cemented for me the importance of having options for mobility. And that is what ultimately led me to this work that I do now here with Link Houston, advocating for more transportation options in Houston for all of us who, for whatever reason, don't own a car. We deserve to live like first-class residents regardless of car ownership.
Thank you. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself and how you came to do this work?
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me as well. So yeah, as I said, I'm Laura Zelston. So I'm from Chicago. I kind of grew up in the lefty political organizing space. And I have a policy background, but had been more focused on health and other issues. And while I've had a number of disabilities for years, it kind of took me a while in adding some to identify as such. And honestly, I wanted to get back into working with Access Living because it is kind of operates in an interesting way and like an interesting space and has an interesting role in Chicago. And transportation was what was available. And like in the process of applying and starting at this job, I kind of realized I had a number of transportation takes, and that probably my obsession with, say, vehicle hood heights had to do with the fact that I'd had it was minor result, but like hit by a car when I was in college. And like the size of the car, right? Because it hit my knee and not my chest, there was a thing. Anyway, since kind of being in this role, I realized how much transportation ties to everything, and how few resources and like space there is for people advocating specific land disability issues, and like within the entire transportation space, like all kinds of disabilities and like multimodal transportation. So yeah, it's kind of staying here because it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a follow-up question. So can you talk a little bit about Access Living and what kind of organization it is? What are Centers for Independent Living? I think there's probably people on this call that aren't aware of that history or that organizational structure, just to give people a little context.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. So Access Living is a Center for Independent Living. It is a federal designation. It is kind of what it sounds like. It helps people live independently. One of our founders and one of the people who ran Access Living for a few decades up until a couple of years when she passed was Marka Barista, who also helped write the ADA and get it passed. We are I work out of the advocacy arm. We are atypical in how large we are. I think we vie with Berkeley for one of the largest. There's just about 100 people who work at Access Living. Our advocacy arm is sometimes larger than the rest of than like the size of an entire SIL, which is closer to maybe 10 folks, but it's like helping people with sometimes like deaf services, housing locators, providing like skill sets and community for people who want to live independently, so they don't have to be in nursing homes. And a huge issue that consistently we find is transportation. If you want to live independently, even if you have all of these other resources, are you still going to just be isolated in your home?
Yes. And we hear the same thing here in Washington State, right? At Disability Rights Washington, that transportation access and then the housing piece where you can afford to live are so critical. Gabe, do you want to talk a little bit about the work you're doing at Link Houston, some of the advocacy campaigns that you're focused on right now, and some of the challenges or barriers that you guys are facing?
Sure. So Link Houston is a relatively young organization. Link Houston was established in 2017. We had just elected a new mayor for the city of Houston, and transportation really wasn't a big part of the campaign discussion. But thanks to Link Houston's advocacy, along with our coalition partners, folks focused on climate justice, environmental justice, air quality, we pushed the administration hard to focus on transportation, not just in the traditional sense. Houston has prioritized moving vehicles at all costs for more than 50 years, but really start to shift the focus to pedestrians and those of us who need multimodal transportation options. And we had great successes. Our mayor adopted a Vision Zero policy. We developed a high injury network. We successfully got some Safe Street redesign work done. And then in 2023, our mayor was term limited, and we had another mayoral election. We elected a mayor who is decidedly anti-multimodal transportation. So right now, we're focused on ensuring we keep the progress that we've made. Along with the new mayoral administration came new appointees to the Metro Board of Directors. That is our transit agency here in the region. So we're spending a lot of time educating new Metro leadership about the importance of developing the service for people who are riding it today, for the everyday user, focusing specifically on frequency, reliability, accessibility, and safety.
Yeah, I've definitely been following from the outside some of the challenges you have right now in Houston with leadership. It can make such a difference. So Laura, do you want to share a little bit about some of the work that you're doing currently around transportation advocacy in Chicago?
So probably my biggest campaign has been Plow the Sidewalks, which was a push for municipal sidewalk snow clearance, which we co-lead with Better Street Chicago, which is another org local to here. We did come to an agreement with the city. It has been a long process. We came to an agreement with the city, with the new administration. And hopefully there will be something that comes through in December. There's supposed to be hearings and actually funding for it, which would be for next winter. And that would be for a pilot. So 4 different zones throughout the city looking at sidewalk snow clearance, because the city clears the streets, but because while sidewalks are considered public rights of way, they are still always considered the responsibility of the adjacent property owner, whether that's repairs or sidewalk or snow clearance. Seeing if we can get that through. And, I think it's been interesting because we've gotten support from such a wide variety of groups and people. Like parents constantly talk about people walking their dogs, businesses that want to benefit just because, people being able to pass and get through. And obviously talking about how isolated disabled people can be. And like, that's both being able to walk around, that's being able to both get on the sidewalk, walking and rolling, or just being able to also clear the snow. So that's one of them. Then other ones have to do with there are a number of pushes that are related to transit. I'm the CTA ADA committee chair. So I push a number of things in that space. We're on the steering committee for Free the Move, which has to deal with pretext traffic stops. And there is a kind of real intersection when it comes to, say, people who are deaf and pulled over. kind of concerns related to that, in addition to the fact that dangerous driving really isn't enforced and people with mobility disabilities are particularly at risk. Then there's recently been a push, and like the thing I'm excited about is that there has recently been a push that got some response related to DuSable Lakeshore Drive, which is the big highway on the lakefront in Chicago. And I'm not excited about the redesign because it is just a highway widening, but there has seemed to be some response after there's been a lot of pushback from advocates on minimally trying to get bus lanes, but also trying to think through. So not optimistic about the fact that that is what our transportation agencies wanted to do to begin with, but that there does seem to be a large number, like groups of people coming together on a range of issues. And like transportation folks here have also seemed, I want to say, first I'm talking like something I have found really helpful and like nice is that transportation groups, I think that there has been a good relationship between disability community and transportation orgs, and like understanding that sometimes things are complicated and trying to talk through how we can deal with those complications and like how we can be a coalition and like be stronger, as opposed to not. And like, yes, you know, we listen to them, but also like they hear us out when we raise things. And I think trust that like if I'm raising something, it's not because I'm trying to spike your policy, it's because I have an honest concern, and like let's discuss, like let's figure out a way to like make this work, so that because like there is a lot of alignment, right? Disabled people are disproportionately non-drivers. There are a lot of things we're going to align on. So like let's, you know, trying to figure out how to make things work for everyone.
Yeah, thanks. And that piece of, yeah, there are tensions sometimes, right, between transportation advocates and disability groups, but how do we find that common ground? And how do we start to build a relationship so we trust each other enough to listen to each other when we disagree, right? And we can hash that piece out. Gabe, do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, who are your allies in the transportation work, and how does it, you know, as a disabled person within a transit advocacy organization, what that is like in bringing that disability perspective into the transit world?
So I was sitting here nodding with everything Laura was saying, specifically around sometimes the tension that exists between disability advocates and transportation. One of the pieces that I've been really excited about that Link Houston has really honed on over the last year is meaningfully engaging the disability community. In Houston, similar to Chicago, sidewalks are the responsibility of the abutting property owner. So we have a huge mess of areas of parts of the city that don't have sidewalks, parts of the city that have old or broken sidewalks that are literally being lifted up by tree roots, and making it impossible, not just for people with disabilities, but folks who have strollers, folks who are older adults and who walk in their neighborhoods. So we had a conversation in July, a disability community town hall and transportation, where we got to hear from folks locally and from across the country on their experiences with the transportation network, both personally and professionally. We are using that as a springboard to continue engaging the disability community. Next year, Link Houston is going to undertake a comprehensive citywide sidewalk study where we provide municipality and the county with actionable recommendations to improve our sidewalk infrastructure for pedestrians. And having the perspective of the disability community is going to be really important. So that is one of our allies. Engaging and meaningfully engaging with the disability community, I think, is really important. But in addition to that, especially in the time that we find ourselves with a more oppositional mayoral administration, really understanding who our champions are at the elected official level has been really important. We started off by meeting with every single member of Houston City Council, introducing ourselves, the organization, the part of the work that we focus on. And we learned a lot. We learned a lot both from the people who don't support us, which I think is almost more important, hearing their perspective and understanding how they view the world. But also we were able to identify champions who do carry our message at the Horseshoe where City Council has their debates. Same thing at the county level. identifying our champions and really making some effort to push good policy at the county level, since it's a harder road to hoe right now at the city level, but also the nonprofit community. We work very closely with organizations that focus on different parts of the transportation system, like Houston, Air Alliance Houston, the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. So really creating a wide tent of organizations that, whether they recognize it or not, do touch the transportation component, has been really critical for us to build power in coalition work.
Yeah, you touched on the opposition piece, and I wanna get into that a little more, because I think, we often, especially I think in this transportation space, don't talk explicitly about what we're up against. Like, why is it so hard to get these missing sidewalks built, or to get transit funded, or to get, cars to travel at slower speeds? Do either of you want to reflect at all um, on why, like, what are we up against? What is the narrative that is making it so difficult for us to make these changes? And I think that's a that's a tricky one too. But in the context of sidewalks, even specifically, like what is the opposition to having municipal sidewalk repair, or is that the solution, right?
I
Or
would tell you that
sidewalk,
for
yeah.
here in Houston, part of the challenge is always funding. So the city of Houston has a citizen imposed revenue cap on top of the state imposed revenue cap. So we actually bring in less tax revenue than most other municipalities in the state of Texas. And that causes its own problems. All of to work at the city, so I have firsthand experience. All of our departments are chronically underfunded. A lot of the focus, I think, rightfully goes to public safety. But what frustrates me in the public safety conversation is that we fail to acknowledge that having usable sidewalks, having safe street design, having lower speeds, so pedestrians, particularly pedestrians with disabilities using mobility devices, aren't regularly killed on Houston roads, is part of public safety. So one of my personal goals has been, how can we continue to push this conversation specifically around sidewalks, and use this conversation around public safety to frame sidewalks as part of that comprehensive public safety plan?
That's some really interesting framing, and I think, yeah, strategic, because yeah, it is a safety piece, right? And the immediate, the safety of not getting hurt, right? But also just the safety of being able to move through your community and get where you need to go, get the healthcare, get to, the grocery, get over to friends' houses. Like, those are all part of public health as well, right? And safety, right? In a deeper sense. Laura, yeah.
Oh, I was gonna hop in, but if you want to switch to the
No, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is inertia. And there is the piece where, and that gets into some of the other issues where, like, the feds don't really fund it. But local and state groups could fund it much more. I think there is also just this lack of awareness or understanding of how bad sidewalks are, especially if you are not disabled and you don't have a kid. I feel like a lot of times when people realize how bad sidewalks are is if they develop a disability, they get injured, or they have a kid and suddenly they realize, like, oh, it's not great if there aren't curb ramps or if the sidewalks are extremely broken. In Chicago, there is a live in Chicago, there is a live pothole tracker you can follow to see as they fix them. That does not exist for repairing sidewalks. It is in fact very difficult. Chicago is interesting in that the city will not totally admit this, but adjacent property owners aren't actually technically responsible for repairing sidewalks. You can do a voluntary program, the 50/50 program, and like spend thousands of dollars, and they will brag about how the fact that this is a successful program tells you how bad the sidewalk, how bad it is that people will spend thousands of dollars to repair the sidewalk in front of them. But there's like a range of issues, and I think it's just also this perception that sidewalks are not necessary, or that they're like, it's like they're a perk. they're not really that needed, and that and then that they're in sorry, that they're in much better condition typically than they are.
Yeah. No, this idea, right, that they are part of the public right of way, and yet we're not maintaining them the way we are our roads. And that we allow them to be so impossible to travel, especially for people with disabilities, is really, oh, it's so frustrating. So I want to ask about this framing of non-drivers that I use in the book, and for me and for our work here in Washington State, it has been a really useful frame, because for us, when we started talking to people who couldn't drive or couldn't afford to drive, people didn't necessarily identify as disabled, even if they had disabilities. There's a lot of stigma in that word. There's different sort of cultural interpretations of what disability means, and so. For us, non-drivers was a way to talk about, having these common access needs of being able to get around without driving ourselves, without requiring people to identify with the word disabled. I'm curious how or if you all feel that non-drivers is a framing that's useful in your own work and your own advocacy and thinking about how to organize a coalition. Gabe, you want to kick us off?
I love that framing. For a long time, I've been talking about people for who whatever reason can't own a car, and that is bulky and wordy. And when you say non-drivers, that is so easy to understand. And what I particularly love about that framing is that we're not just talking about people with disabilities. We're talking about older adults. We're talking about people experiencing homelessness. We're talking about a wide tent of people. And I think that that's so important. A lot of times what we hear in these transportation fights is, well, nobody walks, nobody bikes, nobody takes the bus. And we fail to acknowledge the fact that there are people with a variety of lived experiences that rely on these modes of transportation. And I think the non-driver framing is a perfect way to encapsulate that.
That's good to hear. Laura, how does it work for you? Is it something that you feel like you can use, or are there other ways that are more useful to talk about it?
I mean, I think the extent that you guys know, as anyone who works in the disability space knows, because disability is so stigmatized and it's hard to sometimes get folks to identify with it, that anything that'll get people to acknowledge it without, even if they're not using that specific word, is helpful. I think the way that it can kind of build community for people who are not disabled but aren't driving for other reasons is helpful. But also just driving the point home with and particularly people in government, that you have to build modes of transportation that don't rely on driving. And that might mean that no matter how much money someone has, there might be folks who can't drive. Because I find that that's a real sticking point. And that's something that I've kind of had to push with, because I work with a lot of government agencies about we're disproportionately non-drivers, and you have to have options. Blind folks can't drive, right? People need to be able to take the bus and the train. They need to be able to use the sidewalks to get there. So yeah, so I think that is very helpful. And and also because it's kind of a community you can opt into. So it is, yeah, I think it is a helpful framework.
Yeah. No, and we're not, I mean, yeah, even if we have a lot of resources, there are people who can't drive. I think it's an important piece. But there are so many folks without those resources too. And I get really frustrated. This is a tangent, but in the conversation, almost anytime I have these webinars, there's questions about, oh, well, won't autonomous vehicles solve all your problems as a blind person or a low vision person who can't drive? And even if I had the resources to pay for it, I think there's lots of reasons that's not the future that we're going for, and the future that's realistically going to work for so many people in our communities. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, we talked about this non-driver framing, and I think there are people, right, who are choice non-drivers, and there are people who are involuntary non-drivers, and it's not always a total binary either, right? There's people who would prefer not to pay for in a vehicle, which are really expensive, insurance rates, oh my gosh. I was talking to my dad about his insurance rates and how they've gone up really significantly in the last year. But people who choose not to drive but could drive, people who can choose to live somewhere where there is good transit or where they have good biking or walking access where they need to go, and then people who really don't have that choice, and it's a continuum. But altogether, there are so many of us, and we can build these coalitions. But we need to be really intentional about making sure that the people sort of with the most choices, the choiciest choice non-drivers, aren't the ones always setting the agenda, or perhaps they're the folks with the most ability to show up at meetings and be active, but that we're also really being intentional about listening to folks who have less choices in situations. And so I wanted to ask you both around the importance of engaging with the disability community. If you are an active transportation group that perhaps doesn't have folks who identify as disabled as part of your organization, or if you're a disability group, why it's important to reach out and engage with some of these active transportation groups that perhaps, in the past there's been hostility with, because of, a sense that they're not listening or caring about people with disabilities, or including people with disabilities and the way they're framing transportation access. Why do you think this work is, going both ways? Why do you think it's so important for disability groups to reach out, and for active transportation and transit groups to connect with disability groups as well? Gabe, you want to start?
So for myself, I will tell you that before I was heavy into this work, I often saw active transportation organizations, and I would think of them or of like, oh, those are the folks that bike recreationally or are running recreationally. I don't do that. I don't think there's a space for me. So what I've been really excited to lean into with Link Houston is expanding the conversation and saying, yes, people do need protected bike lanes if they're riding recreationally, but also protected bike lanes are helping people who use cycling as their main mode of transportation to get around. Or sidewalks benefit people who are recreational runners for sure, but they also benefit mobility device users. They also benefit folks using strollers. They also benefit this wide variety of people. And I think it's all about framing. At least that has been my experience as we make an intentional effort to engage the disability community, making sure that everyone understands that in this tent and this coalition work to make transportation options more usable and better for all of us, it's gonna take all of us. I always love to go to a government meeting or go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting where they talk about the importance of driving and prioritizing drivers. And I love being the person who raises their hand and say, great, as you're prioritizing that, let's talk about people like me. It's really hard for folks to try to not acknowledge the existence of other lived experiences when those lived experiences are in the room. And I think that's the most critical part of the disability community and the active transportation community working together, is that, yeah, a lot of times active transportation organizations are in these meetings, are in these rooms, and making sure that we're centering the communities that are most impacted is the most useful way, I think, to try and push these conversations forward.
Yes, yeah, that being in the room makes such a difference. Laura, you have anything to add there?
Then I think I think it is very helpful. I think being intentional, and I think on the disability side, making sure that we reach out and have conversations with folks, but also I will say for the transportation folks, like reaching out early and having these honest conversations, and not just because it's a useful photo op or because you are worried at the last second that they're going to use the disabled folks to spike some of your legislation, which yes, folks try to do, and I get very annoyed when that happens. But like, you need to build up trust, and like we need to build up trust. And I think understanding the perspective of a variety of people, that takes time. And again, it takes understanding like things are complicated. I mean, the disability community on its own isn't a monolith. So there can be there can be like it can be complicated even with that, but I just think like it is important. It makes a stronger coalition, and when we're fighting against inertia and a number of other forces, like having as strong and as broad of a coalition is something I think to aim for.
Yes, I think your point about not reaching out to people in tokenizing ways is so important to emphasize. And also, yeah, not at the last minute when suddenly the opposition is using framing around disability to change what's being proposed or weaken it, right? It really, those relationships take longer. Trust takes longer to build, and it's so important to not reach out to people in ways that they're feeling used. So the last question for you all, and then I think we're gonna open it up to some Q&A from the audience. I do, before I ask this, I want to just make sure that people can see your work, Plow the Sidewalks, Link Houston, Access Living. If there's any links or resources you want to share with people, you can put it in the chat, or you can, you can share it. I'll have you share that verbally as well in a second. But before we do that, I wanted to ask about Week Without Driving, which is coming up September 30th through October 6th this year. If you are listening to this and you want to learn more, you can go to weekwithoutdriving.org, and there's lots of resources and more information, toolkits, all of that. But to talk about what you have done in the past, your organizations are thinking about doing, what would be awesome to do if you had all the resources in the world someday in the future. Starting with Gabe, do you want to share anything about plans for Week Without Driving this year?
I'm really excited about this year's Week Without Driving. So we have this year's Week Without Driving. We have a variety of things going on. At one of our major fundraiser falls, we've made it align with National Week Without Driving. Ahead of that fundraiser, we are having, we're going to the Houston City Council, to the Metro Board meetings, and the county court to challenge all of our elected officials to take at least one trip that week without using a personal vehicle. We're also hosting a Transit in the City community conversation that is going to be free to the public. We are going to have people from across the country join us, sharing their experiences on transportation advocacy. We're also going to have a panel of local folks talking about how they are advancing active transportation. We have a state elected official joining us. We have advocates from different communities. So I'm really excited about the representation that we're building for that community conversation. And then we're closing off Week Without Driving with our big annual fundraiser. And I'm really excited that Anna, you will be our keynote speaker, talking about the importance of National Week Without Driving and why it is that we do this work. So I'm really excited. I think there's going to be a ton of opportunities for a variety of engagement. We're going to be featuring some of our Community Action Network volunteers on our social media, sharing their non-driving experiences throughout that week. So I'm really excited for what we have planned this year.
Yeah, I'm hopeful too that, I think the Week Without Driving framing, it's a way to talk about the need for some of this change in a way that maybe it can be can reach people who would otherwise be not open to hearing messages about active transportation or transit, because it really is like talking about people who don't have other choices and need those sidewalks, need those bus routes, need all of that. Gabe, are there any links or websites or your personal social media you want to shout out for people to follow to learn more about Link Houston?
Sure. So folks can always find us at Link Houston, LINK Houston.org. And you can find us on Twitter at Link_Houston. I think we have a similar handle for Instagram and Facebook. So please follow us and learn more about our work.
Thanks. And Laura, Laura was part of when we first started getting all these emails about taking Week Without Driving to a national audience. Laura was part of the original sort of convening committee as we started talking about, okay, what would it be like to do that? And how do we make sure that the essence of Week Without Driving retains, the focus on equity, the focus on non-drivers and involuntary non-drivers in particular, and disabled non-drivers and non-drivers who are low income and people of color. How do we do that and allow it also to be really organic and allow people from all over the country to take it and do creative things with it? So Laura really helped us shape that piece. And another piece I just want to call out is Laura's been pushing for a long time for us to have more national conversations about sidewalks and how we're, what are local groups doing around the country around sidewalk maintenance and missing sidewalks. And so we do have a group of folks from different states who meet quarterly. It's very informal, but if anyone on this call is interested in, is doing work around sidewalks and accessibility and wants to be part of that conversation, you can let us know and we can invite you into those meetings. Laura, is there anything else you want to add or share as far as social media or websites to follow or what you all are doing right now that you want people to know about?
No, and it's, especially after Gabe, I think has so many things planned. I think we have some things TBD, but got a little overloaded with staff capacity wise. But yeah, Access Living, you can find our site. If you are aware of people who don't know what resources are available in Chicago, we have a thing on our website that's just how to apply for various transportation services for people with disabilities. Because we realize that people aren't aware of that. So I guess if you want to use that, but no, otherwise, and I'm kind of like not really on social media. So.
Okay. Sounds good. So I want to turn it back over to Ruth now. Thank you both for this great conversation. We're going to open it up to Q&A from the audience and see if there's anything that we can answer for you all, our burning questions. So Ruth, turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. That was a really great conversation. I think you guys touched on a lot of things that people have been talking about. So the first question is actually just for you, Anna, because people are wondering if there's an audio version of your book or if it's, available right now, Audible, Bard, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is not available on Audible. It is available on a site that's available for blind folks where there's a digital, and not like a computerized voice reading it. We are working on an audio version that will also be available through the Talking Book and Braille Library. But again, that's only for blind folks. So in the future, I would love there to be an audio version, but it wasn't part of my publisher's their capacity to do that. So I'm hoping we get there. But yeah, we need an audio publisher to want to take that on and produce it. So yeah, in the future, hopefully it will be. You can, I guess there's ways to play it through, just text to voice in Kindle, but I know it's hard to listen to computerized voices read books. My kid likes it. I find it absolutely super annoying. So yeah. But if you are blind or low vision, it is available on Bookshare currently, and it will be available through the Talking Book and Braille Library.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Somebody asked if each panelist could give an example of tensions between disability advocates and transportation advocates. Because, there are some people that would see, obviously, them as an ally. And so I guess, yeah, expand on that disagreement a little bit more if you can.
I can start and give folks a second to sort of ponder that. One thing that comes to mind right away is conversations about bus rapid transit or speeding up buses with bus stop removal or consolidation. And so, a lot of transit advocates think that's a good thing because the buses will run more frequently, perhaps be more regular. But for a lot of disabled folks or folks who are, carrying heavy groceries or walking with a small child, or just, moving more slowly, that further distance to a bus stop can be a huge barrier and a significant barrier. And so I think that's something that gets often overlooked when advocates are pushing for faster bus service and asking for stop consolidation. The impact on that on people who it may take longer, a lot longer to get places. And that's not there's a tension there. Laura or Gabe, do you have any examples you want to?
Yeah, I can hop in.
Yeah.
Protected lanes can be very complicated. And there are people with disabilities who use protected lanes, but also what happens is then for stops, you have to then cross transit. It's bike traffic, but that's still traffic that used to be on the sidewalk. And for people who do drive, who have wheelchair, who have ramps that deploy, those now deploy into traffic. So kind of turns what was accessible parking into inaccessible parking. And like, there are a variety of reasons for why, say, someone who is a wheelchair user might disproportionately also want to drive if they can. Like, there's that. There is also an issue where sometimes when protected lanes have been installed, they have been done so in a way that there is no longer any place for like paratransit or cabs to drop folks off. Right. So there's just like no way for someone who has a disability to get there. And that's in it, like for someone with a disability where they're like a wheelchair user to get there, which is a huge issue. Now, it also keeps people from sidewalk riding because it gets people, there are also advantages, and there's ways where, again, it's like where we want to be in community, and it's just like, let's figure out what is the easiest way to get someone to the bus, whether that is kind of the thing where it's like, let's figure out, this is complicated. I think like Anna and I have been talking about this for a couple of years of like, what do we do about the floating bus stops? Like, there is no, to my knowledge, like perfect solution, but just what can we do that's best? And like that I think has been, but that's been a tension, and I kind of had to get some folks from our community to try and kind of like listen in on why like we couldn't just try and stop all the what the argument was for protected lanes, but also then talk to other folks about like why we need to think about how they're being implemented, like, and doing so just like not in a haphazard fashion, and maybe not like on bus routes that are next to each other. So that's kind of thing.
Gabe, do you have anything you want to share on that?
Yeah, I think Laura covered it. Those are some of the examples that I've seen as well.
And sorry, just to add one more thing, Ruth, I know that there are a lot of conversations going on in transportation spaces around the best ways to design bus and bike infrastructure so that there's, minimizing conflict between users. But yeah, I think there's sometimes not an awareness of how disruptive that conflict can be. And how people trivializing what it feels like to be a blind person getting off a bus into a bike lane, and what that experience is like. So yeah, really more attention needs to be paid, and I think we can do a better job of listening to each other. All right, sorry, Ruth.
Yeah, no problem. Somebody also asked, and I think this is a really interesting question and kind of also talks about that sometimes tension between disability and transportation advocates. But this person said that they've seen like a lot of, or they have concerns about the blockages that we allow in walk zones. So, sidewalks. And so there's a lot of untrimmed vegetation, bikes and scooters that get left out, especially if your community has bike share programs. So they're wondering, like what is the micromobilities like, I guess like spot in this, like what do they play in leaving shared vehicles on sidewalks and that block pedestrians and people with disabilities, and like what can we do about it? If you have any examples of any conversations where you've tried to engage micromobility users and those who also bird, Lyft, etc.
Gabe or Laura, you want to jump in? I have some Seattle examples, but we'll start with you guys.
So I'll tell you, I lived in Baltimore for almost 5 years. And when we got the scooter craze. It came in hard and fast. And part of the challenge was the inconsistency of deployment. I mean, it really did seem like overnight, tons and tons of these scooters were dumped in our neighborhoods. And like most cities, Baltimore is a city that already struggles with the usability of its sidewalks. So as a blind person, I can't tell you how many times people just left scooters in the middle of the sidewalk or thrown wherever they could. And I have tripped and I've fallen and I've hurt myself a few times because of those. So things like that definitely create tension. The city of Houston for a long time has been resistant to those types of devices. I think as conversations continue to shift here to microtransit, we might see a resurgence of that conversation. And as it comes, our focus is going to be deployment. I think there is a way for pedestrians and these types of microtransit devices to coexist, but it's all about how it's deployed and the education for folks who benefit from these devices about their responsible use.
Laura, you have anything?
So in Chicago, we have lock to regulations. So scooters are supposed to have to be locked to something. And the bikes are supposed to also stay off of the sidewalk. I would say this is not always enforced. And minimally, I guess if you are using them, I would just ask that you stop leaving your scooters in the middle of the sidewalk. They're because even when I deal with them, like I have a bad back, they're very heavy to move. And so just please stop. But like, yes, I think like lock to regulations are better. Also we have pushed, it seemed like originally the contracts with the city were intended to have some sort of automatic response when sidewalk riding was detected because sidewalk detection technology was required. But none of those responses actually were mandated. So like there is a speed ceiling if it is your first ride, but there is no speed ceiling if sidewalk riding is detected. And we've been pushing for multiple years to just not to get it so that it stops going, because I know that, you know, people feel unsafe sometimes, but to get it so there's like noise, so there's a noise emitted so that folks know if there's a scooter going and that there is a speed ceiling. So that's like you can't go 15 miles on a sidewalk as long as it's your second ride, when you can only go 10 miles on the street if it's your first. Yeah.
Yeah, the lock two piece. I'm hopeful because Portland just required lock two in their their next round of contracts, and Seattle does not. And I really think we need to. We've given the companies too many years to try to figure it out, and they haven't figured it out. So I'm a big fan of the requirement to yeah, not just leave them wherever you want to, which is unfortunately the default here.
All
Do we
right.
have time for one more?
I think I guess we can do one more after this and then we'll wrap up. I guess in your opinion, Anna, because people have been asking about Week Without Driving, what would make Week Without Driving successful, or what is one thing, you know, that has made it successful? There's a lot of people that are really interested in hosting Week Without Driving in their community, and maybe just give us a little bit about your experience that, you know, that made it successful in Washington State.
Yeah, this is such an interesting question because I've spent the last couple of weeks reaching out to some of the places that have been harder to find people and, trying to convince them that even just little things are actually make a big difference. And so, sure, it's great if you have an elected leader who's an ally or someone who works in your city staff and the transportation agency or transit department, who's going to do the challenge in some capacity. But even just that conversation where you ask them to think about it and you talk to them about the reality that so many people in every community can't drive, or too young to drive, too old to drive, disabled, can't afford to drive, right? Like that conversation in itself, I think, is important, that awareness around the existence of non-drivers. And so for me, that's the successful piece, right? If you can have a conversation with someone about that, even if it's a family member, maybe you have a sticker or a flyer and you just have that conversation with someone. I think that counts as success. You post on social media, maybe there's a news story, like those are all add-ons, but just beginning with that awareness that this exists. And yes, even in super rural areas, there are non-drivers, lots of non-drivers. And, it's not just cities we're talking about. It really is the whole country. And we can start to design systems that work better for all of us if we recognize that it's not meeting the needs of so many of us right now. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank Gabe and Laura, Anna for joining us. This was a really great conversation and a conversation that I think needs to happen in more spaces. So really appreciate it. We'll close out this webinar. Pull up the slides. All right. If you're interested in keeping our work going, please consider making a donation. This keeps our program thriving, so really appreciative. And also, thank you for joining us. We will be doing an October webinar, so be on the lookout for that. And finally, you can visit weekwithoutdriving.org to join us. There's a sign up button and you can learn more about it on the website. So feel free to join us for this year's Week Without Driving. Thank you so much, everybody.